Let's repeat that. All right. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the May 7th, 2024 meeting of the Mecklenburg County Economic Development Committee. I'm Commissioner Susan Rodriguez McDowell, and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of this committee. So we want to welcome all of those online and also all of those in the room. The meeting agenda was sent out already to everyone on the distribution list. So if anyone else would like electronic copies of any presentation materials today, please make these requests via email to the amazing, to the fantastic Megan Witt. Her email address is meganwitt@mecnc.gov. So we're going to start out with introductions for those of us here in the room, and I'm going to start with my colleagues. I'm going to start on the right,
Okay.
as is our custom.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. Mark Jarrell, District 4.
Good afternoon, Laura Meyer, District 5.
Good afternoon, Lee Altman, County Commissioner serving at large.
All right, thank you. And then we'll go to our staff. We'll start with our Deputy County Manager.
Sure. Good afternoon, Leslie Johnson, Deputy County Manager.
Good afternoon, Mike Bryant, Deputy County Manager.
Fantastic.
Good afternoon. My name is Roger Johnson. I'm the Economic Development Director for Mecklenburg County.
Shahid Rana, Deputy Director.
Clay Andrews, Office of Economic Development.
Keisha Whitley, Office of Economic Development.
And Megan Witt, Economic Development.
Jamelia Davis, Economic Development.
Agustin Velasquez, Economic Development.
Karen Stanforth, I'm a Sustainability Manager for the county.
John Walton, Economic Development.
Okay. No, okay. All right, well, thank you. And let's go with those online. We'll have our guests. They'll introduce themselves when they do their presentation. So let's have our online folks.
Yep. So online with the Public Information Office with Mecklenburg County, we have Brett Clampett. With the Mint Hill Chamber of Commerce, we have Paige McKinney. And then we have John Wang with Third and Urban.
Awesome. All right, thank you. So the first thing we want to do is approve our meeting minutes from April 2nd.
So moved.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. The meeting minutes for April 2nd have been approved. And so I will now call on Deputy County Manager Leslie Johnson to introduce our guests and our first topic.
Awesome. Well, again, good afternoon to everyone. Today, we have a presentation by Third and Urban with regards to Lower Tech Phase 2. There is a Phase 1. They'll give you a brief overview of the Phase 1 development and then the interrelationship between this. This is a project that we're just teeing up to get your reactions. There's no decisions today, just making you informed about it. They are also interested to see if you have any questions or other types of things that you would like them to take in consideration that they may be already contemplating or haven't contemplated as relates to this project. I will now, before we do the full introductions, let Shaw and or Roger do additional introductions.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I'm going to be a little bit redundant to what Dr. Johnson said. And the purpose of today's meeting is to continue the work in our Economic Development Strategic Plan 2.0. And in particular, it relates to the public-private partnerships, so the potential of those, as well as placemaking. We wanted to provide an update on Lower Tuck Phase 2, but most importantly, we wanted to hear your compliments and concerns as it relates to some key and salient points that we have been negotiating on behalf of the board as it relates to the board's priorities. So as you listen to this presentation, I ask you to pay particular attention to these particular items of interest. Inclusion of workforce housing in this project. It's a testament to the developer that this was not part of their original plan. They've been open to contemplating workforce housing to meet the board's priority of secure housing in our community. We'd like to talk about hear your thoughts on the environmental stewardship of this project, a brownfields remediation, the removal of a cement factory, as well as some other things that they'll speak to you about. The third being their MWB efforts, MWBE efforts. It's already part of their core work. And so they've never really come forward to ask for public funding in the way that they have today. And so they don't necessarily have the history, but again, it's a testament to their willingness to be open to our processes and our projects of contract by contract, subcontracting and MWBE work. And then the placemaking aspects, in particular, the quality of life surrounding the community as it relates to small green spaces, infrastructure upgrades, community programming, and connecting to public parks. And you'll see all of this in their presentation. But these have been some of the points that we have been negotiating on behalf of the board. So your thoughts and comments on those will be incorporated into the next round when we would plan on coming back in June with an official ask of what a tax increment financing may look like with more specificity as it relates to the public benefits. And then, of course, any other comments or any concerns you want to express, we'd certainly be open to those. So that's kind of the structure we'd like to propose to you today. And yeah, yes, ma'am.
I would like to know in this presentation in general, like when you begin. Thank you. Whether or not this is something that's being brought to us because it's bubbled up through some process that is appropriate, or if it's something that affirmatively the manager's office is supporting, is recommending to us, because it helps me understand the orientation. And I would like to know that if possible.
Sure, I'll chime
before the presentation, because
Okay, sure.
I'm wondering it the whole time and
No, I definitely think that this project is a great opportunity for the community. I think there is some but-fors if this development didn't occur. What else would happen in this particular part of town? So much we see development targeted in some other parts of the community. This one is being targeted in an area that hasn't been developed much to date. And so for those reasons in the community that they're trying to reach, we think there's strong alignment to what we think is aligned to your priorities.
Thank you.
Commissioner Arnold, I understand that, and I'll make sure that's part of our process going forward. I will say to you that this particular project started before I began with the county, so I can't really speak to the history of that. Maybe perhaps they can as they work through this process.
And to that point, I mean, I know that Sean, I've had conversations with her with both Janae and other Third and Urban team members as it relates to this project. And so again, we think that it's a good place to tee up to get your reactions and comments and then decide how we want to proceed as for.
And then one final comment, given the context of your question, Erin's over there. She introduced herself earlier. She's our environmental subject matter expertise. We brought her into the discussions to make sure that someone who had a greater understanding of environmental issues than our team did got an opportunity to weigh in. LaShonda Hart did the same thing as it relates to affordable and workforce housing. And then the third was Jim Elliott. She's been an integral part of the discussion as it relates to MWBE to fill in the gaps in the understanding that some of our team members may not. You're welcome. With that being said, I'll turn over to Janae Valentine with Maxis Advisors.
Great, thank you. And good afternoon, everyone. Janae Valentine with Maxis Advisors, which is a founder commercial company. And at Maxis, I serve as a project manager. So my role in this project has been a consultant, and I've served as a liaison between the development team and as well as the county. I know Roger mentioned that this project started discussion prior to him joining, and it definitely started with Shah. I do want to note that prior to my role with Maxis Advisors, I did work for the city of Charlotte in economic development. So really understand the elements that it takes to truly create a public-private partnership that is a win-win for all. So we have definitely tried to look at the goals and priorities of the county and try to implement those into this project. We've had a number of discussions with county staff, as Roger has mentioned, and we just look forward to your feedback. We want to thank you for the opportunity to present today, and I'll pass it off to Pierce so he can talk more about Third and Urban as a firm and the project. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pierce Lancaster. I'm a partner at Third and Urban. Just want to say thank you for your time this afternoon. I'd also just like to compliment your team that we've had the pleasure of working with over the last few months. I mean, just truly a well-oiled machine, very pleasant to work with. And we've really enjoyed the way that they've brought in the various team members to sort of guide us along the way and really tailor our efforts and our proposal in accordance with the county's goals. So really appreciate what's been a team effort to date. Again, my name is Pierce Lancaster. I have on the screen with me my colleague John Huang. John has really been leading capital formation efforts for this Lower Tuck Phase 2 project. But by the time this meeting, or we landed on the docket for this meeting, John had a long planned trip to London for a friend's wedding, and then he tacked on Morocco to that. So he's really leaving me hanging here in Charlotte. But I want to jump in here on the front end and talk a little bit, as Janae said, about our firm and about our work to date. And then John will chime in and speak a little bit more specifically to this second phase of our Lower Tuck project in West Charlotte. We are an Atlanta-based firm. But actually we have more work going in Charlotte than any other market that we're active in. So much so that my wife looked at me the other night and said, do we need to move to Charlotte? That probably gives you a pretty good indication of how much time our team is spending here. We really love this city. We've had just a wonderful experience in our work to date here, and we hope to be investors here for many years to come. I'll talk a little bit, I guess, let me start guiding here. Oh, that's probably right for now. So I'll talk a little bit more about our firm. So we are truly a community-centric developer. And we, so why is that? Both John and myself and my partner, Hank, were all previously at a much larger investment firm, real estate investment firm, that was truly a social-oriented investment and development company. We were trained that way. It's sort of in our DNA. But that company had a national portfolio. And so in 2014, my partner and I decided that we were going to leave that firm because we really wanted to be focused on the Southeastern United States. Our belief was that if we were focused in a smaller number of markets and really focused locally on our work, we could have a much greater impact on the communities in which we operate. So, again, that is kind of the genesis of our company. What does it mean to be a community-oriented developer? We are very active, almost unanimously across our portfolio in projects that are really intended to drive improvement in their local communities. We do a lot of adaptive reuse. We take buildings that are really dilapidated, we improve them. We are big on community engagement on the front end. We undertake activation efforts in those communities throughout the life of our developments. We hold a lot of community events. We really have a acute focus on placemaking. I'm not saying that because that's a goal of the county. We talk about it all the time. We put an inordinate amount of energy into that. We really anchor most of our projects with a retail element that is meant to bring services and amenities to communities that have been underserved or underinvested to date. We could do a deep dive for hours and hours across our portfolio. You would see that as a very consistent theme. And we really think about that when we choose where to engage in our work. So if you look at our portfolio in Charlotte alone, we have two main projects. One is in Sugar Creek. We'll talk about that one in a minute. 13 acres on a light rail station, very historically underinvested area of the city. And then on the west side of Charlotte, also a underinvested area that we were drawn to those areas naturally when we first came to Charlotte 4 or 5 years ago, because those are the types of areas we've been active in Nashville and Atlanta and Birmingham and other markets as well, and in other markets around the country with our prior employer too. So, I think to touch on that a little bit more, I think the areas in which we are participating, the areas in which we are active, in and of themselves, we find are very diverse, right? So we have a natural sort of community that we're able to engage with, and therefore sort of diversity and inclusivity is a natural element that sort of spawns out of our projects just by virtue of the location. But we are very committed to those ideals. We focus on them a lot. We spend a lot of time developing a program to engage the community. We provide, maybe getting behind here. We provide, a lot of our space for use for free to a lot of local organizations. just sort of a fundamental feature of our work. As you said before, often engaged in historically industrial areas or areas that are underinvested. So very active for us. We also have a good bit of P3 experience that I'll talk about it as well in a minute. It's a good precursor to what we're trying to accomplish with the county and city here. Investors, development partners. We have done projects with a number of different investors and co-development partners who really sort of share the same ideals that we do. Starting the top left, Blueprint Local. This is a social impact fund based out of the Baltimore area. PGIM, you all might know PGIM as Prudential. We have invested, or they've invested alongside us through their social impact fund. Blueprint's fund is a qualified opportunity zone fund, which you're probably familiar with that federal program. Actually, both of those groups are invested in our project in Sugar Creek here in Charlotte. Exact Capital, Bolster Real Estate Partners, Legacy Real Estate Development. These are minority-owned real estate development groups that are co-development partners of us. And at least one of them, Bolster, is actually a programmatic partner that we, a Black-owned firm that we pursue multiple projects with. Bottom left, Project Destin. This is a social impact group that places minority students into real estate roles. We have on more than one occasion gone through their mentoring program, acting as mentors to their students. We've hired an employee out of Project Destin. NAIOP also has a diversity intern program. We've done two interns out of NAIOP's diversity intern program. On the right side of the page, this is just a sampling of many of our local partners who represent MWSBE organizations. I'll hit a few here of note. Top left, Mariah's Taco Spot. This is a Black-owned chef restaurateur who is operating out of a food truck. We have leased space to her in our project in Sugar Creek. We've put her into a fully formed restaurant space and providing a hefty TI to help her build out space. We find that oftentimes, minority firms are in need of upfront capital to help launch their business. So we provide sort of move-in ready space that they can occupy. Another example would be She Built This City. This is an organization that provides skills-based training for women and other marginalized communities. They have held events in our buildings. We provide that space to them for free. That is a matter of due course for us in all of our projects, providing space for free from organizations that whose budget may not allow them to pay for that space. We recently just signed up the Queer Design Collaborative. This is a new committee formed under the Architects Institute of America. They're going to be doing some event programming in our buildings as well. So again, just natural engagement for us. We do this on a regular basis, and have been doing this for 3-4 years now in Charlotte, and expect to continue to do so. Public-private partnerships. We've done a few of them in various capacities and various kind of angles. We were chosen last year in a public RFP by MARTA. I'm sure you're familiar with MARTA. It's our heavy rail line system in Atlanta, to develop the Bankhead MARTA station. This is actually adjacent to what has been perennially ranked the most dangerous neighborhood in America. This is in partnership with 3 MWSBE co-development partners of ours. Big focus on access to MARTA, access to non-vehicular forms of transit. Big focus in our design efforts around accessibility and obviously the benefits that this can spawn for the surrounding communities. Another partnership is with the Atlanta Beltline. You may be familiar with the Atlanta Beltline as well, our kind of pedestrian path around Atlanta. We have a project not dissimilar from Lower Tuck called West Side Paper on the west side of Atlanta. We actually were able to secure a partnership with the Beltline to bring a spur trail of the main Beltline trail right at our back door. Again, trying to encourage non-vehicular forms of transit, accessibility, in another part of town that has been historically fairly disenfranchised. Oh. So I'll touch for a minute on our project in sort of the northern part of NODA, Sugar Creek. This is a 13-acre site. We're developing in partnership with a social impact fund as well as two opportunity zone investors. We have multiple phases here. This will be a 10-year project for us. We'll be in it for quite some time. First phase is 80,000 feet of commercial space. We are building out move-in ready retail spaces, move-in ready office spaces. This is again, our goal on the retail side of this is to have 80% of our retail rent roll be local retail operators. And we have, of the 5 leases we've signed to date, 3 of those are. So we're tracking well there. You'll see a consistent theme in all of our projects, brownfields. So environmental abatement processes there, lead an Energy Star, engaging local artists. This is in all of our projects, pulling them into the projects and sort of local representations from local artists. And then I would say as well here, both public and private transit, a new sort of access to the Sugar Creek light rail station, as well as we're building a section of the the Greenway Trail that runs through this project as well. And then one element of this project I'm particularly proud of, when Atlanta at its MARTA stations has a partnership with Atlanta United, which is our MLS team. Station soccer has mini pitches at the soccer stations, and there are junior programs based around soccer for disadvantaged communities. Bring those kids in and they get to have a place to play and formal instruction as well. When we first got to Charlotte or first got involved in this project, we were standing there on the light rail line in the Sugar Creek area. We were looking under this bridge and saying, what can we do here? And the idea was spawned, well, what if we replicate what Atlanta United is doing on the stations in Atlanta? Through some local partners, we made connection with Charlotte FC. We've now built out our first mini pitch. We're actually planning a second mini pitch. And we're working on forming up a league with the same goal of kind of activating the local youth to be engaged in that capacity. Lower Tuck overview. I'll touch on kind of where we are today, and then John's gonna jump in on phase 2. Hopefully you're all reasonably familiar with this side of town. You can see in the lower right corner just a little bit of orientation. Panther Stadium off the southwest corner of the CBD. We're about 1.2 miles on the 4th Street extension out to the buildings shown in red, which is Lower Tuck phase 1, or kind of dark orange here. This is about 260,000 feet in our first phase. Our J Street buildings, this is kind of where Not Just Coffee is. If you've ever been over there on J Street buildings are now 90% leased. The project overall at 260,000 feet is just over 60% leased. So we're tracking really nicely. Some prominent features of the project are, actually, let me jump. Yeah, let me stay here for a second, just to orient you here. This is MLK Park. This is the Greenway Trail that goes into Uptown. These obviously are our phase 2 buildings. There's, I guess, 4 of them. Not Just Coffee is right here, if you're familiar with that. Noble Smoke here, Lulu's Crab and Seafood Shack. And then this assemblage here is our Lower Tuck phase 2 assemblage. Some features that were particularly, that's kind of a closer view here. So we have sort of control of this whole assemblage here for our phase 2. As I mentioned, 4 buildings existing, 1 planned, 15 total acres, 90% leased or 60% leased overall, about $106 million total development budget. Some features that we're really proud of here, again, engagement of local artists. These buildings are smattered with murals from some great local artists. We have a co-working operator in one of our buildings called Huga. Huga has a bunch of spaces fully built out for local businesses and local businesses only. All of our retail to date is local. We have a big representation across the project, both retail and office from MWSB firms. So sort of a deep commitment there. We are big design folks as well, just kind of in our DNA. So I think if you were to walk through these buildings, you would say you would be really proud as Charlotteans of the quality of what we've delivered here. And then again, I mean, just a heavy dose of activation. This again sort of comes as second nature to us. So the exercise, you know, prompted by Janae to really put it on paper. It was really kind of pleasing to sort of, you sort of start tallying the list and you sort of get it on paper. You're like, wow, we really have done just a whole lot here to engage a lot of different organizations. I don't want to go through these too much. I've talked about a lot of them, but just a lot of different examples. We have a lot more planned. We're actually shutting down J Street on May 19th, holding our first block party. I think we have over 60 local vendors signed up. And again, this area of town, I'm sure most in the room are as familiar or more familiar than I am with just sort of the history of the west side of Charlotte, and sort of the implications around Tuckasegee Road and whatnot. We've got really great neighborhoods that have just suffered from a lack of investment for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? So we saw that early on. We loved the proximity to Uptown, loved the accessibility, and we really just jumped at the opportunity to come in and start delivering investment, start delivering services, start delivering amenities. I think we are hearing great feedback from those local neighborhoods, and I think a desire to see a lot more. What we have planned here, and what we have planned in the future, is really displacing decrepit buildings, really obsolete, non-functional buildings. We could sink a ton of dollars into improving them so that they can be occupied again. But you have businesses like Lulu's Seafood and Noble Smoke and you know, a lot of great businesses there. You have wonderful neighborhoods with lovely, you know, single family homes, and they're looking across the street at just sort of decay, right? So the opportunity for us is to move that decay away. In some cases, keep a little bit of it and improve it, but it bring, you know, a lot of investment and a lot of continued engagement to these neighborhoods. Just a quick highlight: community impact, 260,000 feet, $400,000 just in the infrastructure investment alone. That number is actually not that large because in this first phase we were reutilizing a lot of buildings, those that were in the best shape. 15 acres, a couple of local artists. We'll have a lot more active going forward. Community events hosted to date 16, and then move-in ready office suites. Again, this is key. A lot of local folks just can't afford, they don't have those big corporate budgets to afford their build outs, be it in retail, be it in office use. We've done 15 to date. We're under construction on 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 right now. We have 2 of those pre-leased, one of them to an MWBSE firm. And then 30 plus tenants, vendors, partners, this is subcontractors, as well as, you know, kind of co-development partners as well. So any questions on what I've shared to date before we kind of get into the meat of the project at question?
So all this is history.
This is all history.
Okay, now you're taking us into your
Got it.
proposed. Okay, thank you.
John?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Great. Thanks so much for the time, and apologies I couldn't join you all in person. I wish I could be there. Before jumping in, I just want to reiterate some of the comments that Pierce mentioned. You know, I did look back, and I think we started the conversation with Shaw back in August of last year. The process from then until now has just been extremely collaborative. And the product that you see here is just the outcome of that collaboration with Roger, Shaw, Dr. Johnson. They've been really helpful in just pulling in groups, you know, the housing, LaShonda with housing, Aaron from the environmental side, and just we've really enjoyed working with the full team. So just wanted to reiterate that before we jump in. Next slide, please. So before we get a little bit more detailed into Lower Tuck Phase 2, we did want to pull up the board budget priorities, just because we think it's a good framework on some of the elements that we've incorporated into our project. We wanted to make sure that we were aligning our some of the goals of the project with the board priorities. I think the 4 that are worth pointing out here would be housing insecurity, which we know is a main focus for both the county and the city. Environmental stewardship, workforce development, and also racial disparities. And we'll spend a little bit more time talking through each of these 4 points. So as Pierce mentioned earlier, the existing conditions of the site are just a lot of dilapidated warehouse buildings. The 2 images that you see up top are actually a building called 1100 Tuckasegee, which we will be reusing in an adaptive reuse format. But the majority of what's there today includes kind of rundown warehouse buildings. And then if you'll flip to the next slide, also a 7.5 acre concrete plant. The community engagement that we've done to date, and also some of the neighborhood meetings that we were hosting as part of rezoning, the kind of the similar feedback from everyone was that they are really excited for this concrete plant to go away. As you all know, they can just really be a nuisance, from noise to pollution to truck traffic and just dragging concrete everywhere. So we're excited to see that go away and be replaced with a higher and better use that will be an amenity for the neighborhood and community. So here is an overall master plan of the site that you see here on the left. As discussed, we are going to be redeveloping the existing industrial manufacturing uses into a very vibrant and exciting mixed-use project that we think will be overall an anchor for this Fremar West submarket, which is really at the intersection of a lot of different neighborhoods between Saverly and Early Park. And ultimately being a really great amenity to the neighborhood and community. It will include a substantial amount of housing in both a traditional multifamily apartment format, and also some rental townhomes. And then really the soul and the heart of the project is around 40,000 square feet of commercial, retail, and restaurant space, which you can see there in red. That is really meant to activate this current, just kind of sleepy industrial super block and really bring life to the project. We envision that having a lot of open space and community space, and again, bringing amenities to the neighborhood. So this is just a quick phasing plan. Everything in red will be put into production as part of phase 1. So that will include the 40,000 square feet of retail and commercial space that I just mentioned. A little over 400 multifamily units, and then also 50 rental townhomes. And then as part of phase 2, we will have an additional around 420 multifamily units. So just to dive into a little bit more detail on the 2 components of phase 2. So phase 1, which is what Pierce spent some time talking about. This is phase 2. Phase 2, we've broken into both an A and a B phase, which was the green and red shown previously. And a lot of this is just repeat from what I spoke about. But phase 1, the focus is really activation, placemaking. Today, this is just a really large, super block, and breaking that space down, providing additional connectivity from both vehicular and pedestrian to other transit that's nearby. But really just bringing this pocket of the neighborhood to life with some amenities. As part of phase 1, we will be also completing a pretty significant infrastructure investment. This is to introduce a new public right-of-way that will kind of flow through the site. That includes utilities, sidewalks, roads, lighting, some of the pocket parks and connections as well. If you can flip, one more.
Yeah, John, sorry, I've just been pointing out a few things in the room, so.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, I can't see what you're pointing out.
Yeah, all good.
So,
All good.
So I did want to spend a little bit of time just talking more about the retail program here, because I think it's what we are most excited about on this project. So what you can see here on the right is are some renderings of 1100 Tuckasegee. So we are proposing both that building and the one behind it at 1033 Berry Hill will be redeveloped in adaptive reuse format. They are the most architecturally interesting. So we're just excited about some, the authenticity and kind of the contextual feel of that, given the existing and historic kind of industrial neighborhood. You can see this on the left here. We think it's really important to make sure we have a large variety of spaces. So we have a lot of smaller 1,000 square foot spaces here. And naturally, those are much better suited for just small businesses or new tenants, especially local tenants. We will likely, and I'll spend some time talking a little bit about this later, but we would likely take a large chunk of these smaller spaces and make them move-in ready as well. And that way, your local mom and pop shop, they don't have to put in the capital investment on the front end to get their space to a place to where it can be opened. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this is just a quick outline. This will be the second phase of phase 2, which will be 420 multifamily units. And then from a schedule perspective, we are currently scheduled to start construction on phase 1 the beginning of next year. Construction will take probably 24 to 30 months. So once we deliver that, our plan would be to start with phase 2, call it in 2028, and about a 2-year construction timeline for the additional 420 units. So that's a quick overview on just overall programming for what we are including in Lower Tuck Phase 2. So now we want to spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the board priorities that we flagged earlier, with the first one being the workforce housing component. I think Roger Rachal mentioned earlier, and I think when we first started having discussions around this project, we had approached this as just a market rate multifamily deal. Specifically within the apartments. And I think after hearing the feedback that housing insecurity is a focus for the county's board, we have proposed to provide 5% of the units, which is 42 multifamily units as workforce housing at 80% AMI during the term of the TIG. Based on some discussions that we had with LaShonda a couple of weeks ago, I think we are interested in taking those 42 units and potentially providing deeper levels of affordability through the housing voucher program. We do have a little bit more due diligence to do there just from a legal perspective, and but that is a continued discussion, and we are very much open to providing that deeper level of affordability. One thing to note is, given the back and forth that we've had with Roger and Shaw, we've been discussing, are there other ways that we can provide additional affordable housing? But ultimately, we decided that it was not financially feasible. Our understanding is that there's essentially a cap on incentives that can be provided based on the amount of infrastructure that we are completing for the project. So if we were going to provide, call it 20% at 60% AMI, it would really require a, complete rework of the project as more of a LIHTC, low income housing tax credit deal. So we did explore a couple of different options with Roger and Shaw on how we could maybe get more than 5%. But we ultimately ran into some roadblocks from both the financial feasibility standpoint and also a legal perspective. Environmental stewardship. So a lot of these have been hit on already, so I'm not going to read all of them, but I think a couple of ones that are worth hitting just really quickly is we will be putting the entire site through the brownfields program, in addition to removing the concrete plant. Based on our discussions with Aaron, the feedback that we heard was that improved connectivity and kind of access to alternative transportation is a really important focus from an environmental perspective. So, two things that we have proposed would be one, providing a grant that would allow us to extend the Stewart Creek Greenway, which you can see kind of runs next to Seversville Park and runs next to Savona Mill. Currently, it stops right there where the pink ends. So we would propose a grant that would allow us to continue that creek to provide additional pedestrian connectivity. And then a focus of ours generally on the site plan is just, again, breaking down this big super block and really providing additional connectivity to the overall neighborhood. Workforce development. So you will probably see that a lot of these items that we are proposing to do in Lower Tuck Phase 2, we did mention that we completed as part of Lower Tuck Phase 1 and also the Passover in Sugar Creek. Those are just initiatives that we've done in other projects that we know have been successful in achieving the things that we wanted to. So as we think about Lower Tuck Phase 2, a lot of these items that we're proposing, such as move-in ready, small format commercial spaces, are things that we've done elsewhere in our portfolio that we know have been really well received, and we feel like is the right thing to do for Lower Tuck Phase 2 as well. So just to highlight a couple of those, number one, we would propose to build out a small community art center. That art center would be used for artist studios as well as event space to provide activation for the neighborhood. We see that space being leased at a discount to an operator such as like Charlotte's Art League, who's over there by Sugar Creek, or Goodyear Arts. We know that those operators cannot pay a full rent, so we would be looking to provide some level of subsidy to make sure that they can operate in a financially viable format. And then I think, move-in ready space, which we've done in Phase 1, but also just making sure we're partnering with the right groups such as Business Launchpad, and just making sure that we're a resource for small businesses that are maybe looking to upgrade their space, and just making ourselves visible to the kind of startup and mom and pop community, and making sure both upon initial lease up of the space, but also on an ongoing basis that we can provide office space for those types of tenants. And then the last item here is just our MWSBE kind of goals. We are targeting 20% participation really across all phases of the project. So really that starts with initial design, construction of the actual project, and then also the ongoing management and operations of the project. We thought that it was really important to make sure that we have an actionable plan for tracking those efforts that will be used by the project manager. Your team was really helpful in helping us kind of create this plan, which is shown on the right, but really just kind of laying out how we can make sure we are engaging with the MWSB firms from really early on, making sure they're aware of the project, but I think hosting pre-qualification sessions, but I think most importantly, just making sure that we have a way to really track our efforts and report that data back to everyone. And then this is just a list of some of the other benefits that we're providing. I won't read through all of these, but I think maybe just to hit a couple. We heard that the digital divide is a focus for a number of folks. So we've proposed that we would provide free Wi-Fi throughout all the public spaces. Again, that would be free, available to the public. Increasing kind of safety and security throughout the neighborhood through some design elements. And I think one that Pierce mentioned earlier was the block party, but I think we want to continue to see that go on long-term as part of Phase 2 for the deal. So yeah, that's it. So I think we'll open up the floor to any questions.
Okay. Thank you very much for that really thorough presentation. So let's see who wants to begin. Questions, Commissioner Altman?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. It's definitely an interesting project. So you say designate 5% of the units as workforce housing and 80% AMI for the term of the TIG. What is the anticipated term that is at least being discussed right now?
Commissioner McDowell, we would propose somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 years and 45%, but it would be somewhat contingent on the feedback we get from you all today. Obviously, the more public benefit we put into the program, the more cost it will be for the developer often. So that may vary a little bit, but the general idea would be consistent with previous tax increment grants that have been 45% over 15 years.
And you would envision, I mean, if I'm recalling correctly, for example, the Pearl was a TIG and they were going to demonstrate increased tax revenues. So that's what we're talking about here, plus community benefits.
That's correct. The tax incremental value increase will be used to fund these public benefits. And so if they don't deliver on the tax incremental positive increase, there will be no incremental return on their investment.
Right, okay.
Before you go on,
Yes, ma'am.
can you just say that again? You said 45% over 15 years?
That has been historically what the county has provided for the Pearl and Ballantine. And we just set that as an example of how we may look at this particular TIG.
And what's the 45%?
So theoretically, if this particular developer paid $100,000 a year in taxes, they would pay their taxes and then we'd give them 45,000 back.
Okay, got it. Sorry.
No problem. On environmental stewardship, I don't know if you've had any discussions with our expert around stormwater runoff and using technology that may be more expensive but allows for greater absorption, like parking lots, that there's material that allows the water to seep into the ground and not run. And so if you haven't had a discussion about what's the right term, like water mitigation. Sorry? Right, like if you haven't had that conversation. Yes. So as you're going to redevelop, I know that that would definitely catch our attention. If that is something that the next time we hear, you can come back with some commitments around that, because I know we're all very worried about every step that we take reducing impervious surface is making more acute our risk of flooding and dangerous water. On workforce development, I would like to see when you come back, something more concrete than the last bullet point, something like we've talked to Charlotte Works and we believe that we can, we're going to need to hire 200 people for X, Y, or Z, and they have a willingness and ability to target that population of people they're trying to get connected to work with this project. So if that's something y'all could explore, I'd love to see that. On the 20% MWSBE commitment, it says target. And so my first question is, what happens if you're only at 10%? And more broadly, are you willing to codify all of these in an actual contract of some sort so that it's not just representations made in public, but something that is somehow enforceable? Because I feel very skittish around representations that do not have teeth in them.
So I'll just jump in here for whatever that's worth. Most of our agreements to date have had those types of languages in there. It still may say target, and that's why they have to work collaboratively with Jamelia and her team, because we're monitoring, try to the best of our ability throughout the life of the project to determine maybe you should try something else here and the like. So that's that language typically is in the contract.
So that's helpful on the 20%, but all the other things, if they don't generate the tax benefit, we know there's a clawback procedure. Is there a clawback procedure if the community benefits are not delivered?
Well, there would be performance thresholds. It would not be necessarily a callback. These would never be, the incentive would never be provided unless they met the percentage threshold. We have purposefully decided not to include clawback provisions because of the difficulties associated with them. So we make our contracts performance-based. And so if you don't perform, you don't get the reward. So we never give it out to come back.
So yeah, I would like a very clear, us to see before we vote, the community benefits that are going to be required before we greenlight any TIG per contract. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Meyer.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate your efforts in working with community groups and listening to what, the board, our priorities. About the TIG, going back to the term of the TIG, what happens after 15 years? when it comes to affordable housing? What happens to those units? They go to market
Yeah,
value?
they would become market rate apartments.
But that would be something we could negotiate on behalf of the board, the length of the terms, how long they would be available for affordable housing. So we'll take that under advisement.
It just worries me. I mean, it's just a Band-Aid. And I understand the money. I understand the financial, it's hard to make affordable housing work. I mean, I get that. But yeah, it just is a Band-Aid on a problem that we're gonna rip off in 15 years. So that does concern me. And really, Commissioner Altman really talked a lot about what I was interested in. I also just want to highlight you working with Westside Community Land Trust, such a great organization. And I also just want the glaring differences between this presentation and the last one we heard. I really appreciate your work. Just want to say that. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Durrell.
Tell us how you really feel.
Do I never know?
So I want to echo what was said. I definitely appreciate the presentation and also the real and actual alignment to the board priorities. I think that's really important. A couple of things the other things that I really like about this is we're doing something that we talked about with respect to going into areas that might not be the sexiest up front and really trying to find a way to transform those areas and provide amenities to folks who have been absent amenities for generations. So I think that is commendable on not just this project, but the first project as well. That's something we've talked about and we've been trying to solve too. I love how you are thinking about business and particularly small businesses and particularly minority-owned businesses. That is certainly when we talk about reducing racial disparities, that is extremely important. Question I would have with respect to that, I know we were in John, you mentioned this during your presentation, where you would essentially upfit a space to have them move in ready. I've always been concerned about, we could do that, but you're still gonna price them at the price per square foot that is unattainable. So I guess I would say to staff, one of the things that I really would like to see us to start doing, the same way we look at affordable housing and subsidizing those units, we have got to find a way to subsidize space for small businesses because they're still not going to be able, it's still going to be out of reach because you're just pricing in the cost of the upfit into the square footage. I mean, you have to. So I'd really like to see us solve to that because if we have mom and pop business X, if they can pay a reduced amount price per square foot, 20% less or 30% less, and we can carry that over an extended period of time. And, eventually they'll graduate from that and can pay market, but I got to get them in there first. So I would love for us to see if we could think about something.
Yeah, it's a great comment and I think it's spot on. I think what we find oftentimes is that the upfront capital, as we've already said, is the bigger hurdle than the rent, but you're no doubt right. There are just types of businesses that aren't built regardless of who owns them or other factors, that just the way that they're built or the business that they're engaged in, they are not able to afford a market rent, right? So your comment is heard. I think we can take a look at that and think about coming back with something a little bit more tangible in terms of ongoing affordability in the commercial element of this project.
Appreciate that. Couple other things. Your MWSBE, I do like the intentionality around that. I think Commissioner Altman's point around that is spot on, and I would definitely double down on that as well. Like it just can't be aspirational. I mean, we need to understand how we're going to hit that, and track that for sure. The next one, again, with respect to workforce, I think you guys have thought about that, but would like to see some community partners. And then going to the housing piece. Now, this is the rub for me with respect to the 5%. That if I can see the AMI and say 80% AMI, but the 5%, I don't know how we can tackle that. I understand that last bullet point, what it says, but I would even be willing to look at some other options because just 5%, I probably can't get there. I've got to see 10 for me minimum, unless there are going to be some other things with respect to the small business space or some other things coming in. But 5 is a huge gulf for me personally right now. But again, I know Dr. Johnson, I know you go dollar for dollar on the benefits, so I would like to see that. I'm not Xing it out. But 5% is light for me where I'm at right now.
And it's hard. And what I would just I'll continue to commend, they didn't have it at first, right? So to
Understood.
get us to where we are was, really them working with the numbers. They're nimble enough and they'll hear you. And I think they will receive and see what they can do.
Understood.
And we'll manage accordingly. I think the other piece, the other part that is equally important was the additional conversations that we had with LaShonda around the rent subsidies. So trying to understand how we could possibly even reach more by being able to allow some other types of partnerships for reducing the rent so you get them more affordability there. So we hear you. We'll do our best and sharpen the fences.
And we're also working within the framework of the legal system, which says we can only provide as much rebate as the infrastructure allows us to reimburse without it becoming a housing project.
Right.
So it's,
Right.
We have to stack things in order to make it
Exactly.
greater than 5%. And we almost have a gulf where if we go from 5%, we got to go to 20% to make it a LIHTC project, which these developers would have to sell off assets. It'd have to go through a year-long process of making sure they met all the LIHTC standards. So we'll do the best we can to increase that, Commissioner. Just want to make sure we understood the framework.
No, that's helpful. But I know we can get there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Terrell. Okay, so yeah. The best thing that jumps out to me is that this is a historically underinvested in area. So that for me, boom, goes right to the top of what makes this different from other proposals that we've seen. I like that the retail is local. That really does mean something to me. I do have a question about the city has approved the rezoning in November of 2023. And so this was a project that was built prior to considering county investment. Is that correct?
The phase 1 was, right?
Okay, the phase 1, but not this phase 2 that we're talking about now. This is when you talk about engaging with our team.
That's correct.
Okay.
The
So-
one thing I would say is they informed us about phase 1 as well. So just like we had conversations with them about the past, and then we didn't bring that to you. So we've had Shah has had conversations with them. I want to say even more than a year, had familiarity, but trying to find out what's the right alignment. And so for this circumstance, to make sure the public benefit was there, the phase 2 was more appropriate than the phase 1, but they didn't ask us for phase 1.
Okay.
Just
So I just want to, the reason I wanted to speak to this is because I want to have, a bit of transparency or understanding around what is the public benefit that would not be there if it weren't for our involvement. And so now I don't, I'm not trying to be harsh, but when I look at housing insecurity, 5%, and I heard what you just said about that. This doesn't feel super meaningful to me. It doesn't feel like oh, this is really speaking to our priority in a big way. Okay, it's minor, it's there. So I'm thankful for that. But it's really hard to say how much I can support when I don't know what the ask is. So if you're asking for, $15 million or 20 million, you're like, I don't know, are you asking for 250,000? You know what I mean? Like, I need to know the amount.
Yeah, I can provide some context. So when I originally started the conversations with Janae and Pierce over a year ago, it was really just to understand their project conceptually. And as we continue to understand what were the key elements that they wanted to bring into the development project, really the basis of a tax increment grant is the amount of infrastructure. So when they put on the screen roughly a $25 million infrastructure improvement, this project would essentially be a interlocal agreement. And we would also look to the city to partner on with us on this. So there's elements of the roadway, construction, sidewalks, infrastructure that still has to go through the city's due diligence process. So part of the reason why we didn't say, hey, this is going to be a $20 million TIG, because theoretically speaking, if they had a $25 million infrastructure cost and all of those costs were, approved, then it will be a $25 million TIG. But because we have to go back, understand, hey, what elements of your comment should we add, such as potential rental subsidy? What elements can we potentially take away, vice versa? And then also, I don't want to speak for Todd, but Todd just talked along with the city of Charlotte. He has to also submit this project to their capital improvements program, because they may say, hey, the $25 million is okay, but we can only support $18 million, which means the TIG then goes down to $18 million. So there's a due diligence and vetting period in which we're soliciting your comments, understanding what areas that we can approve on or go back and forth, and it's still very iterative. But typically when you see a TIG and you look at infrastructure costs, 9 times out of 10, that's roughly what your TIG request is going to be. And we don't want to say that's going to be it, because they still have to vet that process and understand that not dollar for dollar is going to be approved in regards to the TIG.
Right, okay.
And it's not just an investment on what is eligible. For example, if they do all the grading everywhere, only the areas of public infrastructure may be eligible, but it's also that the cost is reasonable for that type of construction. So there's a 2-part process that could reduce the overall amount that we're eligible to participate in.
Okay.
And I think
Okay.
the perspective that I would add to this is that the numbers aren't here yet because we wanted to float the concept by you. And if you think the concept is okay, that you're starting to lean into, yeah, I see this project, then we'll continue to work with the city, continue to work with Third and Urban, and try to get to the numbers. But based on what we just know today, and what they're trying to do is provide, because of the infrastructure platform that's used for tax increment grants, we recognize our board wants more than just infrastructure. So now we're putting other elements in, but those other elements really aren't really completely eligible, but we're trying to work with developers to get them nonetheless. So it's kind of trying to do both of those things, if that helps.
Yeah, that helps. I mean, some of the other elements of which you guys mentioned, the more you add, the more they have to justify the actual infrastructure. If only $10 million of infrastructure is justified, all of the other benefits in regards to rental subsidy, it can't fit in there, because you essentially increase the actual grant beyond what the viable infrastructure is. So that's the balance. They talked to us, they wanted to add more. We've seen performers from them at 15% set aside, 20% set aside. They originally started out at market rate. We talked about workforce housing at 110% AMI. We talked about 80% AMI. We brought in LaShonda to even bring in rental subsidies to go from 5% set aside at 80% AMI and potentially provide some subsidies to get it down to 50 to 60% AMI. But none of those things really can be penciled in until we justify the actual infrastructure costs. So the free Wi-Fi, the free charging for EV, the rental subsidy space for commercial, all of those things are secondary, and they don't even get added to the list until legally we can justify the actual infrastructure. So that's the balance that we have. So when we bring a project to you and we talk about the board priorities, really it's the developer really wanted to be a good partner, for lack of better words. If not but for our investment in the infrastructure, vast majority of the community doesn't have that site access. There's still a 7.5 acre brownfield cement factory in the middle of the community. There's still a housing insecurity, although it may not be the percentage of AMI set aside that we want. Those are still units that if you don't build them today, in 5 years, in 10 years, if they were to approach capital from a different source, the price goes up. Every year, construction goes up 20%. So if they don't seek that opportunity here, then those 4 market rate apartments go up even more every year that the project doesn't happen. And then you also have blight, which is associated with crime, which is, the tax values go down because you have dilapidated structures and functionally obsolete space. And it caves in, and, disinvestment just continues to birth disinvestment. So
Thank you, Shaw. That's really, really helpful context. And I really needed that. So thank you. I appreciate it. No, that's really, really helpful. So if I move on, one thing I also wanted to say about the housing insecurity was is there any room, or is there any thought of, any of these being purchasable as opposed to rental? Like to help, for people to help build equity, like condos instead of all rental, townhouses that you can buy instead of rent. So that was another point I wanted to make. But getting on to environmental stewardship, I really need more understanding about this because I'm feeling like, so let's just go by the points. So brownfield remediation of 15.5 acres, is that something that is like I think I've heard about Biden having a grant program where this is actually a federal government grant. Is that what's being used to do this? Removing the concrete plant and these kinds of things. Is this, it's not like it's just part of y'all's price. Is that right? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, John, you want to speak to that? I'll just make one comment that this is in addition to every other property that we own in the district that we've also put through the North Carolina Brownfields program as well. But John, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so we will be putting the entire phase 2, the 15.5 acres, through the North Carolina Brownfields program. So that program will essentially outline things that we are required to do to essentially remediate the site. So for example, we may be required, and we're still kind of working through this process with NCDEQ, which is the Department of Environmental Quality. So it will be some combination of, for example, removing highly contaminated soil from the site. We will also be required to put vapor mitigation systems underneath any occupied buildings, and that's just to prevent any environmental contaminants from doing any harm to people. So there are a number of things that go into a brownfield remediation, and they're things that the NCDEQ comes up with based on the testing and kind of due diligence of the site. That in turn provides a level of protection for people by putting it through that brownfields program, if that makes sense. And it doesn't include any sort of federal or state level subsidies. There is a tax abatement component that essentially helps us offset the cost from the brownfields remediation. And I know we haven't provided numbers yet, but there's an element where we're not kind of double dipping both the brownfields and the TIG. We were specific to exclude that.
Okay. So that double dipping was kind of what I was trying to get at there. And Energy Star certification for multifamily, that's just normal, right? That's not over and above anything that's normal. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think candidly, you see most developers do Energy Star these days as a minimum. It is more of an operational certification, so we just find that it's more impactful from a sustainability perspective. But yes, most developers do Energy Star, though technically it's not required.
And then the improved connectivity, proposing a grant to extend, does that mean that you guys are sponsoring the grant? who sponsors the grant for the connectivity and who actually builds the connectivity?
I think we are open to how that extension gets done, but what we have proposed for now is that we would be providing a grant to the right entity to help subsidize the cost to extend the Stewart Creek Greenway.
So
Okay,
does that help you? Because what I was going to say is we've had a couple instances where individuals or entities have given revenue to the county to offset the development of it. And so we have another arrangement already on the Stewart Creek Greenway, but it's not for that segment. So we would say, okay, where is this on the capital planning segment? Take those funds and either offset it, or if it wasn't already budget, use it to go towards it.
okay, because like I'm aware of another project in Steel Creek where the builder's already gonna be building apartments and they want this trail to go through, so they're going to do it. You know, while they have the builders or the bulldozers out there.
Well, right, if we were to proceed, we'd kind of double the collaboration with Park and Rec and make sure from a capital planning, we've got it timed appropriately and alike, but that will be done that way.
Okay.
And decide depending on who, what makes the best sense to make it happen.
Okay, because I really want to make sure that we're not, you know, sort of greenwashing language, you know, to make it seem like this is an environmental stewardship win, you know? I mean, I feel responsible to make sure that we're not, you know, sort of doing that. And so to make sure that these are really robust points is really important to me.
I would also point out that the part of the greenway you talked about, if I'm not mistaken, is not even on this property. Right? It's an extra piece of greenway that runs above the property. So it's not like it runs through the middle and the developer would build it anyway. This is
Okay, so it's
actually for
not-
another piece of the greenway that's not even on their property.
Okay,
No,
so
it
it's
was
not the green parts being connected there, it's the orange.
It's that little white line that's off their site.
Commissioner, so the idea was to, MLK Park is really kind of buried right now.
Okay,
It's a nice big space. So the idea was just to sort of extend this into the park. So we're talking about kind of this stretch here.
And what I was alluding to is that Park and Rec has a plan around that. So what we would probably do, depending on when they're planning is when they're doing it, either just take their funding and apply it towards this project.
right, okay, because that would be really clear. I think to Commissioner Altman's point earlier, we need to have the sort of point by point, right? To show the clear benefits and, you know, that would be super important. I think those are the main, let me just check my notes one more time. Yeah, those are the main points that I wanted to bring up. So did we hit all of the questions that you guys had? Placemaking aspects, improving the quality of life for surrounding community. Yeah, I mean, is this a gentrifying area that is
Gonna be.
I mean,
I would gentrification in its true terminology is the intentional displacement of existing residents. So just for semantics reason, redevelopment and gentrification are different. So you can have inclusive redevelopment with the intentionality to keep people and to not displace them. But gentrification is the intentional displacement of residents through development. So I just wanted to
Can I
say that
say
before
something
you
to that?
answered.
yeah, because that
It
was,
is-
go
Can
ahead.
you know, if you're looking at this map, there are neighborhoods all around. So there are going to be affected and it's not intentional, like you're saying, but they will be impacted by their property values.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you know, you could,
Yes.
a lot of people would call that gentrification, not knowing that definition.
Yes.
Well, I even think to add, I mean, we have to be realistic. I mean, if you look at, I mean, the area is changing from what
Already.
it was. Like,
Right.
we know that. And so
Mhm.
to your point, Commissioner Meyer, certainly if you look at what's going on in Enderley Park or Smallwood and places, it's certainly changing. But I think the point being, we do have legacy homes and communities there that it would be important for us to make sure that displacement doesn't take place. And
Right.
so when I mean, obviously, when we do a level of investment, I mean, this is, I think communities are trying to solve this all over the country,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
how do you balance this out to where you provide the amenities that people want, but you help them stay there for generations and legacy and to be able to build that generational wealth that you alluded to,
Yeah.
Commissioner. So,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying that that's the job of the economic development team, but those are things that we need to look at as policymakers to see how do we make sure that we don't have negative unintended consequences.
Exactly.
Right,
Like,
right,
if it's a-
exactly.
we like the fact that it's a historically underinvested in area, you know, like that is high up on the list that we don't want there to be this abandoned, concrete thing in the middle of, this area. We don't want that. But we also don't want to put in some bougie thing that it just knocks everybody out.
Right, it's a balancing act. It's
yeah.
definitely a balancing act. And typically sometimes where you see the significant change in assessed values is in those circumstances where you then start seeing the existing single-family homes being deploted and then new development coming back in top of,
Mhm,
on that top of it, and they do bigger or something like that, and then that then starts skewing
Yeah,
the price points that are there.
right.
So
this
these may
seems
do
like
some
more
marginal, but
fits
it's
in.
really not that. It's normally when you start seeing people buying because the land has more value than the structure,
Right.
and then they start putting something else on the land, and that has a higher value, and then it starts shifting everything else.
Yeah.
right.
yeah. Okay, thank you. This has been really helpful.
I have one more
Oh,
question.
sure.
Is it it's not a abandoned concrete plant, is it? It's a working concrete plant.
It is working through, I think, November,
Okay,
but they have
Oh.
found a new site north of town. They are building that site right now.
okay.
So if you know anything about concrete plants, they can't be down for a single day or they lose a lot of money. So there will be a day where they shut off and shut on,
Oh,
their new
okay.
location.
Are they leaving because of the development in the area, or did they see the writing on the wall, or is this
I
something?
think a combination of rising value, and they saw that they could cash in, and I think just generally pressure from the neighborhoods. They know
Good.
that they're not
Okay.
liked. We see this for many areas where concrete plants are sort of holding on as long as they can amidst social or community pressure.
Right.
Madam Chair, well, this has been extremely helpful to staff. We have another closed session item. So if there's any, I don't want to cut off the conversation, but in the sake of time, I think we probably need to move to closed session. And I will say, if you have any other comments, you can certainly contact myself or Shaw directly, and we'll make sure that we incorporate them in the next round of conversation. And thank you very much for the tenor of this meeting and very much the comments. We'll work hard to
Thank you.
incorporate these to the extent that we can.
Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of you.
We
Really
really
Thanks,
appreciate
everyone.
it.
All right, so we have to transition now to closed session, so I need a motion.
I move to go into closed session.
Second. All right.
Warming up to talk fast.
The motion was made by Commissioner Altman, seconded by
God,
Commissioner
10 till
Meyer. All
5.
those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Motion to adjourn?
Second, now motion to adjourn. Okay, all right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Dig it. Thank you, everyone.
What is P3?